My name is Aaron Watson. Every time I start telling the narrative again, I am overcome by a sense of numbness. I'm having a series of mixed emotions about the whole thing and am feeling a variety of emotions. While I sat in front of the television, storms ripped across Lake Michigan. Storms fascinate me in frightening but intriguing ways because of a previous encounter. As the storm came closer and closer, and bigger and greater, I found myself drawn to the window to observe it. I sat there listening and monitoring the internet to see whether I would have to return to the basement this time. The heavens darkened, and a storm was heading straight for us. I was growing impatient as I remembered how the winds and rain had blown the first time. There was nothing when the moment came. There was no wind, little rain, and the heavens did not appear as they did the previous time. The hurricane blew through, uprooting several people, and then went on its way. My folks contacted a few hours later to ask if everything was okay. They had suffered significant damage and were shaken. I was surprised because they lived 3 streets away and there was little to no breeze where I was standing. The storms passed, and the city arrived to assist everyone in cleaning up. Throughout the following week, I was assisting my parents in caring for my nephews. After the chippers arrived, it had been 3 hours. We sat there watching an enormous and frightening machine shred these massive trunks into the smallest pieces of mulch and spit it back into the back of a truck. My father reminded me of the time, 2:58 p.m., because I had to rush to pick the kids from school that day. As I began to rise, my chest tightened, as it often does when I have difficulties breathing due to my asthma. I couldn't tell if it was the food I had just eaten or the dust in the air from the trees. I decided it had to be the dust in the air, so I began to gather myself, got in my car, and drove away. My father observed that I wasn't breathing well, and that I had used my inhaler several times. He was anxious, but said little. I started down the road, and my chest tightened up. But it wasn't until I looked down at my speedometer that I realized I was only doing 20 miles per hour, and it was taking more energy to push on the accelerator. I was sat straight, holding my chest as close to the steering wheel as possible, to catch my breath and raise my oxygen levels by stretching my torso. Nothing seemed to be working. I grabbed my phone to call my spouse, and he quickly recognized my distress. He motioned for me to pull over and inquired where I was. I told him what street I was on when my phone died. It was impossible for me to believe. Isn't it ironic that you're in trouble and calling for help when your phone dies? I was irritated and flung my phone into the seat next to me. I knew I needed to get off the road before I hurt someone or myself, and the last thing we needed was for me to crash the car I was borrowing because mine was getting a new engine. I parked into a golf course parking lot, tried to get my EpiPen out of my purse, then scrambled to find out how to use it. Why can't I open this darn thing like I've done a million times before with the practice pen? Finally, the needle bursts out directly into my right thumb, and as I fumbled to re-grab the drug, I poked myself in the side of my thumb once more. I didn't care that blood was gushing from my thumb at this point. I simply needed to insert the needle into my calf. I stabbed myself in the right thigh, not realizing I hadn't even felt the needle. My adrenaline levels must be so high that I'm unable to feel any discomfort. Seeing that I would need to call 911 but didn't have a phone, I began looking about for someone. I started praying at this point because my chest and throat were so tight, and I was sweating in a hot car, trying not to pass out. I started honking my horn at the gentleman about 50 yards in front of me, who was struggling to get his golf clubs into or out of his rear hatch. He was cautious at first because he wasn't sure why I was honking my horn, but I hit the door button to roll down the window further so that I could lean out and call for help. He began to approach the automobile as he noticed blood dripping from my hand. He inquired whether I was okay, and I told him to phone 911 because I desperately needed an ambulance. The EpiPen made me anxious, almost angry. I wanted to punch something but was also terrified. The gentleman remained very calm considering what was going on, but he grew extremely upset when 911 placed him on wait. At that point, I wanted to cry because I couldn't believe my good fortune. He then dialed another line and introduced himself as a doctor, but I can't recall his name for the life of me. He explained to the other person on the telephone to call dispatch and to get an ambulance out to us immediately. That day, he was my guardian angel. My spouse and a police officer came shortly after he hung up the phone. I was told to use the EpiPen again because the officer suspected there was some medicine remaining in the syringe. This time I gave it to myself in the left leg, and my husband afterwards expressed concern that I would break the needle off into my leg. I wasn't feeling anything at the time. I was furious that the ambulance hadn't arrived yet and was still praying, thinking in astonishment that this may be the day that is etched on my tombstone. The ambulance arrived a few minutes later, and they were transferring me over and onto the stretcher. They lifted me into the back of the ambulance and told my husband to follow. He took a few items from the car, locked them, and climbed into the back of the ambulance. I recall feeling really exhausted and weak, but I fought hard to stay awake. I was terrified and didn't want to pass out. I remember feeling as if I would die if I lost consciousness. They kept asking me questions, and my brain felt like it was about to shut down. I was still irritated from the epi shot, so I asked if they could ask those questions to my spouse because I couldn't think at the time. I was perplexed, and due to a lack of oxygen to the brain, I was in a dust state. I recall leaning back and thinking to myself, I have help. It's good to let go. This annoyed me, but I accepted it. I closed my eyes, and a million distinct images flashed very swiftly before my eyes. I felt light and at ease with no pain. It was a wonderful sensation. I had a million voices talking to me at the same time. I became angry, and I could hear them all. But now I can't recall a single thing they said. Am I going to die? I wondered. It's not fair. I was enraged. My children cannot grow up without their mother. They need me, and I need them. I recall screaming on the inside, at which point my eyes opened and I sat up immediately. This prompted the emergency medical technicians to grab me and try to hold me onto the stretcher. I gripped both of my husband's shoulders and told him that he might not believe in God, but he should start. You have to believe, I told him. Everyone looked at me as if I were insane. I knew my memory would fail me. They won't let me remember. I need to try and recall, I remember telling everyone. I enjoyed the sensation I had just had, but I wasn't going to abandon my children for it. I had to battle for it. I kept urging them to talk to me so I could stay awake. I needed to stay awake. I was stunned by my encounter and relieved that I had been correct. After death, there is life. I was happy, afraid, excited, puzzled, and full of many feelings. Pumped full of medicines, I believed my heart would explode. After then, I don't remember much, and the only discussion I recall having with anyone throughout the 6 to 8 hours I was in the emergency department was with my mother. I couldn't believe that I chatted to her for about 2 minutes, and she got off the phone with me because she had to go to the golf course so she wouldn't be late. That caused me to feel much worse. I told my husband to contact my ex and arrange for the kids to come to the hospital. I was desperate to see my children. All I wanted to do was hold them. I was trying so hard to recall everything about my experience, while also felt it slip away. This upset me, but I was simply glad to be alive. Glad my children wouldn't have to live the rest of their lives without their mother. Watch this near-death experience next about a woman who met a mysterious figure that changed everything for her. You'll learn a lot about what lies beyond from this experience.